Hi guys, my name is Adia. I am one of the jewelry instructors at Pratt Fine Arts Center in Seattle, and I am currently at home, like I'm sure many of you are as well, under the stay-at-home orders. So I wanted to share a project with you that can be easily done inside without needing a lot of equipment or access to like a big studio space. I want to show you how to make some chain links out of wire that we can then make into either like a bracelet or a necklace or a pair of earrings. And it's a really kind of a cool skill to be able to practice because you can then use the same kind of tools and materials to experiment with different shapes and sizes and really kind of go to town with it. So let's get started. The links that we're going to be working on today are going to be these guys. So they link together without needing to be soldered, and you can make them into like a bracelet like I have here, or a necklace, or you can put them into earrings. You've got a lot of options on how to use them. You can also use the same tools and shaping techniques to really sort of play around with your wire and make some different shapes, some different materials, and see where you go. So what we're going to need to make our little chain links here is some wire, a couple of pairs of pliers, and some way to cut the wire. So what I have is a pair of flat nose pliers where both sides are flat and the inside here is really nice and smooth. I have a pair of round nose pliers where both of these guys are round. And then I'm going to be using a pair of flush cutters, which is a little bit more of a specialized jewelry tool, where one side, when you cut your wire, will come out really nice and flat. If you don't have access to a pair of flush cutters, a pair of wire cutters just like out of a toolbox is totally fine. You might just want to, if you have a file also then, would be really good so that you can knock off the burr that you're going to get when you cut with this guy. As far as wire goes, I'm just going to be using this brass wire. It's just like from the hardware store. I'm using a 20 gauge here. You could easily do the same kind of project in copper or silver, in a wire that's a little bit thicker if you would really like to. Kind of play with the different materials and styles and see what you really love. Try it, see what happens. I am going to be making my links fairly small because it's a 20 gauge wire. I want them to still be able to be hardy enough to live in the world without needing to be soldered together. So if I made them much bigger than this, they might not really be as sturdy as I wanted them to be. One of the things to keep in mind if you are going to be ordering some wire, and especially if it's going to be like sight unseen, is that gauge is measured as an inverse measurement. So the higher the number, the thinner the wire is actually going to be. So something like a 16, 18, or 20 gauge is going to be really kind of perfect for a project like this. You could definitely go heavier, something like a 14 gauge, but you might get a little bit it might get a little tricky with the cutting once it starts to get over like a 16 gauge, depending on what your cutters can handle. So just a thing to keep in mind, somewhere in the 16 to 20 gauge range is probably pretty good for this kind of thing. So I'm going to start by cutting my wire into some 1-inch pieces like this. And I want to make sure that when I cut my wires that each side ends up being really nice and flat so that it'll won't get snagged on stuff and it'll tuck under nicely when we roll into our length. So with like something like a flush cutter, if you have a pair of these or if you're going to be ordering a pair, it's important to remember that they only cut flush on one side. So you'll see that it's got sort of a valley here on the inside, and then that the back side's going to be flat. So this side's going to be the part that cuts flush. So if I have my wire, I want to start with a flat end. So if you don't already have a flat end here, you'll want to cut that end, and I'm going to want it to be this way so that I can see that it's flush on this end. And I'm going to cover over the top of this so that my little piece of wire doesn't go flying across the room. And that's what this little bowl is for. And then I'm going to measure out 1 inch, which like this wire from the hardware store is pretty handy because it has this little measurer on the back. So what I just did is I am flipping my cutters upside down then. So then that way also I'm going to get a flush cut on this side. So when I cut this piece, now this 1-inch little guy is nice and flush on both ends. So if I don't have the flush cutters and I'm working with like just a wire cutters from a toolbox, totally doable still. So I will just measure out my inch. I'm probably going to give it just a little bit, tiny bit more than I think I'm gonna need, because I'm gonna have to file down my edges. So maybe instead of exactly an inch, I'm just gonna go like the tiniest bit past. So when I have a cutter that's not like an actual meant to be flush cutter, I'm gonna have little sort of pointy ends on the edges of my wire. So if I just have like a file and I can file down those little ends, just so that they're nice and flat, so they don't catch on you, they don't scratch your arm if you're wearing a bracelet. It might take a little bit of doing, but any kind of a flat file would work. It can be bigger than this, it could be smaller than this. Kind of just working with what you have is pretty okay. So just kind of knock the ends off of those guys, like so. And you can kind of feel with your finger when the sharpest parts are gone. All right, that feels pretty good on that side. There might be a little bit of a flipping of a back and forth and a back and forth. So that feels pretty good. So I can add that to my pile. So I'm just gonna keep cutting a bunch of these guys just so that we have enough to make a pretty decent size of chain. So again, I'm gonna have to cut the end of this guy flush, catch that and throw it in there. And then I can use these even as sort of like a little template to get my pieces all the same size. So I've got a flush piece on top, and then on the bottom, I'm gonna cut that little guy down. That's pretty good, etc. So once we have a bunch of these little guys kind of ready to go, we can start shaping our links. I'm going to be using the round nose pliers to shape our links, and then we'll use the flat ones to kind of shore them up at the end. So I'm going to take in my dominant hand my pliers, and I'm going to hold on to the end of my wire. I want the end of the wire to be like inside of the jaws, not like sticking out, and not like so barely in there that it's hard to hold on to, but just like in there, like pretty secure, pretty in there, pretty fine. And then I'm going to use the barrel of the pliers as sort of a mandrel to shape. So I'm just like bending my wire around the pliers, and then I'll reach a point where I can't really do anything else. So I'll have to like reposition my pliers, and then I can finish rounding it out from there until the end meets the center of the wire and it looks like a little P. Then I'll take this guy like this, right about where they meet, and I want to do a little backward sort of kick, and then I can recenter my loop so my P has gone into sort of more like a circle on a stick. And then I'll turn it this way so that the circle on the stick is pointing up, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other end of the wire so that they meet in the middle. And then once I get to the end of that, I'll do the same thing where I do a little bit of a counter so that the two circles are perpendicular to each other in the middle of my wire. So you can see that after we bent both of the ends around into little circly guys, there's a tiny bit of a gap in between the end of the wire and where it meets in the middle. So if we wanted to shore that up a little bit, using your flat nose pliers, if you hold the loose end and you use your flat nose pliers and you lift up and push forward, then you push back and push forward, then you can recenter in the middle so that your two ends meet. You will create a little bit of tension in the loop so that that little gap will shore up and tighten in nicely so it won't get snagged on sweaters or scarves or the like. So you can do that on both sides here. So up and past and back and past and then right back into the middle. You can also use your flat nose pliers to recenter if any of your links get a little bit kind of wonky and they don't line up the way that you want them to. But that looks pretty good. So we'll put that guy with our finished ones and we'll keep it going. So I'll show you guys one more time, just in case. It's a little bit hard to see. So I've got my wire right in my pliers. I am going to bend down and around, flip my pliers back up, and then continue. When I hit the end, like so, I will do a little kickback. Then I'll bring my pliers back around the top to sort of round out and even it a little bit. And then I'm going to flip this guy over here and do the same thing on the back here. Down and around until I meet in the middle. And then a little back kick. And then with my flat ones, kind of shore up all those little gaps that you see there. Forward and back to the center. If I wanted this guy to be a better sort of round, I could make it so with my pliers and then shore this back in a little bit. And flip and do the other side too. Oh, there we go. That's great. So we have about 7 inches worth of finished links. This is like 18 of those little 1-inch pieces that we started with, but this is plenty enough to make a little bracelet. You can definitely keep going and make a necklace or something else. You could stop sooner and link a few together and make a pair of earrings instead, something with a nice little dangle to them, like maybe 3 or 4 on each. But I'm going to show you how to connect them, no matter what you choose to do with yours. So if we've got our 2 little guys, each one opens on both sides, and depending on how you want to make yours, they might be a little bit of a different size on each end, or they might be a little bit more even. So kind of depending on what you want to do, you can link them together small to small, big to big, alternating. There's a lot of really kind of fun stuff you can do with this. So all I'm doing is lifting up. I'm going to lift up, not out, so that I get a little opening here. And then I can link my next piece in there. And then taking this guy and pushing it back down so that that little seam shores up really nicely again. If you had access to a torch and some solder, you could definitely solder each of these little links closed on those little seams that we've got. But you just keep on keeping on until you get all your pieces put together. And this is a really good opportunity too, like as you're going, if you notice that like there's a weird gap or something's not quite the right shape as you want it to be, You can definitely reshape at this point, get things a little bit closer together. Now's your chance. So we got our chain. When we linked them together, we lost a little bit of length just because they interlock, right? So it got a little teeny bit shorter than 7. It's about 6 1/4. If this fits you, perfect. If you need to add a couple more links, go for it. If you need less links, that's totally fine too. But the last thing that we have to do is make a little clasp for it. So I'm going to show you guys how to make just a little wire clasp that we can put on the end. Something like this guy has finished sort of edges so that it doesn't snag on anything once it gets on you. So instead of starting with 1 inch, start with 1 1/4 inches of whatever wire it is that you used to make your bracelet. Or not, you could mix it up, a little two-tone, never hurt anybody. So with your piece of wire that's about 1 1/4, you'll take your round nose pliers and doing the same kind of motion that we did earlier, except for toward the end where it's a little bit smaller, you'll do your roll around until it meets. And then you can even make this a little bit smaller and a little bit tighter by just sort of squeezing it down once you've got it how you like it. Just to make it a little bit tighter, since this will be the end here. If you want it to be a little bit bigger and statementy, that's totally fine too. So if this is the end of that, that means that we need to bend this part backwards to make the part of the clasp, the big part that'll loop in. So we have something sort of like that. This is a way that you could also make like an ear wire if you did want to make earrings. You could just cut this off here and like put a little bit of a kick in it so that it can get into your ear easier. A 20 gauge is perfect for ear wires, so if you're into making earrings, highly recommend. And then on the other end, I want to make a little loop that I can connect into the chain as a connecting point, attachment point, that's the word. So something kind of sort of like that, and we can get it to get in together a little more. There we go. That's pretty cute. All right, so I want this to be pretty tight in here so that when I put the bracelet on, it doesn't just fall off. And then with this, the same way that we were opening all of our links, this bigger loop can open and put it right on your bracelet and close it down. And you just made a new bracelet. So this guy should just go right around, link into there. That's it. Thank you for joining me for a little bit of indoor chain making activity. If you end up making some chain, we would love to see it. If you use hashtag #myprattexperience or hashtag #ourartistsareinside, I would love to see what you're working on. You can also reach out directly to me if you have any questions. You can find me at Rain City Forge. Thanks. See ya.